This series of videos retraces the life of Mary Rabagliati, who left her native England at age 20 to live in an emergency camp for homeless families in France. Joining Joseph Brzezinski, she became one of the most influential people, helping him shape Altogether in Dignity, Fourth World as a worldwide movement to overcome poverty. Over the years, Mary travelled to the front lines of the US war on poverty, as well as to South Africa and Sierra Leone. She founded ATD Fourth World's branch in the UK. At United Nations conferences on women in Mexico City, Copenhagen and Nairobi, she convinced many people that the voices of women in deep poverty must be heard. The path her life took began with an unusual choice she made in 1962.
The main choices in life were to go to school or to get married. I wanted something else, but what? I worked as a secretary in offices. I know what it is to go and earn money, go home in the evening and do your own thing. I didn't like it. It just didn't suit me. I thought it was a waste of time earning money, helping to get somebody else rich, and then going out, wasting your time, spending it after. I was looking around for something useful to do with my life. I wanted to give my life some meaning, and I knew it would somehow involve serving the poor. I didn't know where to go or what to do, so I picked up the telephone directory and looked through for an organisation that worked with children. I found an organisation called International Help for Children. They were taking children from refugee camps to have holidays in Britain. Little children, 5, 6 and 7 years old. They asked if I had any relevant experience or qualifications, and I said no. They were nice and didn't laugh at me, as they could have done. And they said, well, you can't help us here, but some of the children we've hosted come from a shanty town in France. We know the priest there needs volunteers to help him in the shanty town, so why don't you write to him? So I did, and he said, come along. So I went. It was February 1962. It was kind of rather a dark, misty evening. The thing that really struck me was when I got off the bus and walked down the road suddenly stopped. There was a tarmac road, and then suddenly it stopped and there was a dust road full of potholes. There was no water and no kind of sanitation. At that time, there was no postal delivery. All services of the town stopped. There were about 280 families in there at that time. It was a big shanty town. There was no electricity, no loos, and there were people living there. I was really shocked by the poverty around me. The conditions the families were living in were terrible, really indescribable. The camp at Noisy-le-Grand had been created because in 1954, another priest in France went on the radio and said he would look after people who were homeless. So hundreds and hundreds of families came to the Paris area from all over France. Suddenly, they appeared from nowhere. They had slept under bridges, mothers, fathers, and children, desperately poor. People at that time said that there wasn't any homelessness in France. All the people in France were absolutely scandalised to see all these people together. The families were supposed to stay only temporarily, but they lived in Nissan huts for 20 years. The huts were about 8 by 24 feet. They were very small. And there were families living in there with 7, 8, 9, 10 children. And sometimes they were divided in half and you had a family on either side. There was no drainage, no toilets, or anything like that. So people had to go and empty their slops. That was one of the things that was really the worst for some of the families. Having to live like that, with a communal slopping out place. It was always disgusting. Some of the families there got housing elsewhere, very, very slowly. But most of them grew up in that place, had their whole childhood and adolescence there. They lived and died there. Many people died there. It was very poor, but what is more important to understand was that the families there were sort of dumped at the edge of the society of France. Exclusion as much as poverty. The road ends and there was no refuse collector. Exclusion is when everything just stops and people are left on the other side. The families were there and they were abandoned and nobody wanted anything to do with them. No one gave a damn what happened to them. I was 20 years old, just starting out in life and completely unprepared. I came from such a completely different world. I never imagined such poverty could exist. What the families were going through, there was a brutal fact. It wasn't something you debated about or discussed. At that point, the question of what I did was, in a sense, secondary. Just living there was a shock. So different from anything. What Father Joseph Rosinski asked of me, and of anyone who joined him, was to live right in the middle of these families and to do it in a certain way, to gain respect of the families, and also to gain respect for them in society. I argued with everything he said, but no one living there had invited me to come. They would insult me all day long. What are you doing here? No one asked you to come. After 3 weeks, Father Joseph gave me the job of working in the laundry. Actually, not just working in the laundry, but running the laundry. Nobody had water or anything at home, and of course, they didn't have any washing machines. They all had to go to an outside pump and draw up the water. They had to do all their washing by hand. There weren't any laundrettes or anything like that. So Father Joseph had set up this laundry with 3 washing machines, and the women used to come in there. There I was, hardly speaking any French, and he said, "You, go and look after the laundry." The first day, the teenage girls who came in stole the money box. I'm very proud to say that I got it back, which was, I think, quite an achievement when you consider that they were obviously having one out on me. Seeing what they could get away with this new person who didn't speak their language and didn't know what was going on. It was the mothers who introduced me into the laundry, or rather it was mainly the teenage girls, who I found 1,000 times more difficult and scary to deal with. I spent the first few days just trying to find a way to be useful, but they were the ones showing me how the machines worked. I worked for the next 9 months in this laundry, helping the mothers who came in to work the machines, to wash and to mend clothing. Their laundry was amazing. It had their poverty written all over it. But what shocked me even more was to see what little choice the girls had. All they could do was help their mothers, take care of their little brothers and sisters, live in this muddy, dark place. Plus, they had to deal with me because I was supposed to ask them for some money for the machines, and these families had nothing. For the sake of people's own honour, Father Joseph forbade us to give anything away. But the people had nothing and they ended up cheating and stealing. I had to be severe with them, while still understanding the importance of their dignity. When I first started working there, I was quite lost, and the women tried to make me feel comfortable. At the same time, they kept watch to see how I would react to them. They weren't sure they could trust me. Little by little, the situation became reversed, until I was accepted as having authority there, and I was the one trying to help them feel comfortable. The responsibility I'd been given was to show them how the machines worked, and to make sure the irons were put away properly, but also to create a good atmosphere. It's fortunate that this last bit wasn't stressed too much, because if there's one thing that makes me want to flee to the other side of the earth, it's being asked to create a good atmosphere. Just as though it were as easy as laying a table. Some people do find that easy, but I don't. If I try consciously to create atmosphere, that paralyses me, and so of course it doesn't work. In the first few days after my arrival, a volunteer who was there before me criticised me for not making enough conversation with the women. I was furious. In any context, I find it foolish to chatter, just of a way of filling silence. I also think there can be just as much of a good atmosphere in silence as in conversation, and sometimes even more. That doesn't mean spending hours in silence. It means using good judgment. And to use that judgment, you have to be relaxed. If you're always trying to think up something to say, it won't work. What I'm saying is that I'm not the type of person to be gaily talkative from sun up to sundown. What I did try to create there was a place where each woman could express her own personality and develop. For those 10 minutes or 2 hours in the laundry, it could be a place to get away from the Nissan huts, which were so very unpleasant to live in. The atmosphere came from the women who showed up and the moods they happened to be in. Of course, they often needed help, but for me, the adventure of each day was to discover what might be behind the moods of one or the other of them, and sometimes of the whole group. I found that much more interesting than the idea of creating atmosphere.